Hello, everyone. I am Tacet, and now that we have done everything with Lyrasza's Lair, I wanted to go over a bunch of teams and various strategy for this place. This is, of course, the most recently added faction that ended up coming in last Friday, and we've had a weekend event all this week for it. We'll be having another event for it in probably about a month or so from now, too. So if you didn't end up getting it maxed or you still wanted to make progress in it later, you'll be able to do so on one of the upcoming Tuesday events as it's about to cycle around. But yeah, as far as Lyrasza's Lair, it's a rather interesting setup as far as how you end up going through it. It is a faction that is yellow-purple, and it is associated to Shen-Tang. We are getting the hero class for Shen-Tang in a few weeks from now, mid-March or so. So even though we can't use that right now, once we get that hero class, this kingdom should be around 12, 13 stars or so. And of course, everything from the faction will end up assisting with that. But as far as the faction layout, it's a rather interesting one, and I do want to show that first. As far as the layout, it still has the standard, of course, first room, final room. Those are always the mandatory two, the ones that are based on the faction itself and all of the faction troops. But then you have yourself these kind of divides where once you do the first room, you have a choice of 3 different rooms: the tier 2, the tier 3, and then the tier 3. Then once you do one of these 3, even if you do this one all the way over here, you will then get these 4 options: the tier 5, the tier 4, the tier 5, and then the tier 4. And then if you want to do rush method, you just do simply one of these 4, the ones that are basically grayed out, and then you get access to the final battle. It's an extremely weird delve because you could go here, 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 and there, and then basically get the delve done. Even though they're not really adjacent to each other, they still count as adjacent. However, what you can't do is go like here and then take a 2 and 3, as that would not end up unlocking the final room. You would have to do one of these 4 after doing one of these 3 to end up getting the final room if you're just doing rush method. This place has no treasure rooms other than random treasure rooms. There's no guaranteed treasure rooms, so a rather bad delve overall. It's also probably one of the most annoying peer factions in the entire game, so if you did want to do that in about a month or so when we end up getting it again, if you haven't already done it, it is worth somewhat considering if you have the excess resources, as it is the hardest or among one of the few hardest peer factions in the game. It's definitely the most random, not necessarily the absolute hardest, but it's definitely excessively random, and it could end up making you have to do more battles than you would normally need to due to all of those random aspects. As far as the troop itself, we have these 4. None of them are really going to be worth it outside of the game mode. We did end up getting a rather interesting mechanic in that in the most recent patch, they ended up adding dual storms, and prior to this faction, we never had any of these dual storms, but they finally add it. There's not really much of a point in using this troop for that purpose, but it has a blue-purple storm, the first dual-colored storm in the game. Dual-colored storms are going to be rather underwhelming for the most part, unless they get some kind of really good synergy. There's going to be some very niche instances where they might be good. Example I normally use is something like red-purple for Yalgwei, if it's on a decent troop that ends up getting that storm, but for the most part, most of these double storms are going to go unused unless the troop itself is already just so good that you would want to go and use it, as a double storm in most situations will actually be worse for having a single color storm, mostly because a single color storm, when you explode or clear out the entire board or destroy it or do anything to basically clear the board, a pure color storm will have a higher chance of landing an extra turn than that of a double color storm, just because the color is more concentrated and more of that exact same color will be next to each other. However, where double storms do come into play into the future is anything that has double converts, things that can convert one of them into its own color and then convert the other one into skulls. These double convert troops with these double storms will probably be pretty strong. However, blue-purple doesn't really have much of a purpose, and the troop itself is basically just dead content, so you wouldn't really use it with it. But there will be some into the future that will be viable. This faction and this troop is not one of them. As far as your strategy for doing pure faction, basically, in this place, you basically want to go and steel attack a bunch. Steel attack off of this thing, you have a 2/3 chance that you'll do something that will be mana compromising to the troop, either draining their mana or silencing them, assuming they don't have immune to either of the two. And then the other 1/3 is that you would steel attack, and the steel attack is how you do a good majority of your damage. The Chaos Hound has a resummon on it, as well as skull spam, which you can kind of alternate between depending on if they have 0 attack or a very low attack, where you can kind of risk going for the summon or just going all in on the skull spam and not worry if it misses, because this thing can miss pretty easily. It's not a high amount of skulls, especially if he does a doom skull and only does something like 6. That's almost guaranteed going to miss, so really inconsistent at landing those extra turns. So you do want to make sure you attack reduce to some capacity before you bother using this. Otherwise, because if you get unlucky, you're going to get hurt by very damaging skulls if you're doing something like a pure faction 500. And other than that, the Lyrasza is mostly just here for the mana accumulation. The Jumble, while it is extremely expensive to do for 16 mana cost, given a troop that can do it for 7, it's still going to be useful that you can get it to align skulls. It also has a bit of a board clear with a 7 explode, which can be a little bit random because it doesn't have an automatic extra turn on that explode, nor the AoE, only on the Jumble. And other than that, it has a standard AoE. Personally, it would just be better if it only had a standard AoE for the most part, but you can use the other two to kind of board control skulls a little bit, or as a backup board clear if basically you have a 2/3 chance that you get to redo the board, essentially, either through Jumble or through a board clear with her ability, and that's the main thing that you end up using her for. That and the +1 purple that can help feed into the other things from the faction. But as far as faction troops, not really going to be using it much outside the faction. The only one I didn't really mention here is the Crazed Troll. This is a pretty standard doubling troll. I personally find most of these trolls do not really have much synergy. Obviously, the trolls that do a single color, like Forest Troll and such, pretty strong. All the ones that do double color, not so much, just because they're really niche on what teams they would end up being used for, and they would generally require you to have to use Titan hero class, and quite a few of those teams might not necessarily want to use Titan, even though it's a pretty good hero class to have. But this one does a mix of blue and purple, which is the exact same color of the Storm, and again, if we got a good Storm into the future, one of these trolls could potentially be good for it if it's actually a good troop. But Lyrasza is not really good enough to justify using this troll with it, which basically just uses two troops just to go and build a team out of a double Storm into doubling those colors. That synergy will probably have usefulness into the future. However, this combination of the two will not be that combination at the moment until we get better options and more troops added to the game that have that kind of mechanic with other better synergizing troops. But other than that, as far as some other teams, what I ended up running for the earlier battles, I ended up going with Mountain Crusher, Harpy Mage, Gaard's Avatar, and Sir Quentin Hadley. Since he's relatively new, figured we'd throw him out. This ends basically like a Rowan team, except a bit more expensive because it's centered around Gaard's Avatar. This team can also be replaced out for a Skia's Shield if you want to bring it a little bit further, but I figured it basically just acts as a quick AoE kill. Similar to how Rowan can just kill everything simultaneously with one cast, this does the exact same thing. And while this does have a slightly higher mana cost in that you need to get 12, based on the colors that the faction is restricted on of yellow-purple, you kind of have to go down this route since obviously you don't have access to Rowan underneath those colorations. So this is basically Rowan build, except more expensive, but it works for factions that doesn't have Rowan as access. But it's the same general premise. And you can even do the exact same Skia's Shield premise with it too. It's just a slightly higher mana cost start. It's not as good as a Rowan team, but obviously when you're restricted, you have to use other things. Next up, this is what I ended up using for a good majority of the factions. It's actually pretty strong. Should probably actually go show the team as well, since we actually didn't do a battle for this faction yet, so might as well just go show one battle at 500, might as well. I'll also go take this tier 2 room, because it's generally the easiest of these 3 that we end up getting a choice of. And this is what I end up running. You can replace out Nimbus Bow and Last Thought with Essence of Evil, but this was suggested on stream, and it ended up working out pretty well. Main reason being, this faction has 4 yellow on the first battle and 3 yellow on the final battle. And while this battle doesn't specifically have any yellow, this troop has the capability of doing double damage to yellow enemies, which ends up making it very, very strong against a good majority of this faction. But basically what this team is, it's basically like a Dwarven Gate team, in that if there's a Storm active, Dwarven Gate does it automatically, but in this case, if there's a Storm active, it will gain 6 mana to all other allies, which basically makes it so you can just keep feeding mana over and over again and just have an infinite mana loop by casting and just keep poking one after another. Actually, I didn't even need to take that mana, because we'll just naturally have it up every single time we cast. And you basically just keep doing this until you poke it out. If you want, you can extra turn spam. Every single thing on this team will gain 12 to all stats from extra turning due to the final trait that gives Strix's 4 to all stats per extra turn. And that does stack, and there's 3 of them, so that's 12. And if you use, you have to use a Storm, so you have basically 2 choices at this current moment in time, Stormcaller or Sunspear. And obviously Stormcaller is the better option. For 1, it has a yellow Storm, and for 2, it counts as Strix, both of which is beneficial in the synergy of this team. Nimbus Bow is a way that you can kind of accumulate a bunch of mana and try aiming for extra turns, which will stack up their stats. However, you can do pretty much any 18 mana cost weapon or lower instead, since they give mana 6 at a time, or really any weapon in that regard. You can end up using one of the Doom weapons, you could end up using Essence of Evil, you can even end up using like Mountain Crusher or something if you really wanted to, if you didn't want to run, like if you didn't have a Storm and you wanted to use the Storm off a Mountain Crusher. So there's several different options that you could go for depending on what you want to do. And one nice thing about this is you can see by him reviving, which is normally annoying, but it will show us that. Oh no, why do we have to get all the skulls? But this does double tap if there's only one left. All the 6 new Guardian troops that end up coming in with epic tasks a little while back, a couple months back. All those do double tap if they have a double hit like that, and if there's only one left, it will hit them twice, and it will basically hit them for 4 times damage if there was a yellow there. And as you can see, as I mentioned earlier, if you do one of these 3, it unlocks these 4, and then once you do one of these 4, it unlocks the boss room. So it's mandatory that you do 4 battles, but you have a lot of choices. The second battle, you have 3 choices, and the third battle, you have 4 choices. So definitely not a lack of choices. So we could go like right over here, it says 4, and then go right over there to that final battle, because generally you would take one of the 2 4s in most situations, as they tend to have lesser effects, as well as lesser stats than that of the tier 5s, which can generally have more annoying stuff. But anyways, as far as the rest of the teams, so these are the main 2 that I ended up running then. Just an AoE quick kill for the lower battles, and then for the higher battles and everything else, I just ended up running Finesse with Nimbus Bow, but you can easily do it with Essence of Evil or any of the 6 Doom weapons that convert into Doomskull that do a full AoE. Aside from that, Pure Faction, of course, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but it's double Dementicore into Chaos Hound and Lyrasza, where you basically use these things Impervious to try and Agile to try to stay alive. You keep disabling with all of the things that they have. You attack steal to the point where you can actually do a decent amount of damage. And once they have 0 attack or a very low attack, you can start skull spamming with Chaos Hounds. If any of these were to die, which you do want to keep them alive as long as possible, but if they do die, you have a 1 in 3 chance to resummon off a Chaos Hound. And then Lazarus mostly here for the blue-purple storm, which you put your banner into, or at least in the purple anyways. And then you basically just use her as a board clear, and occasionally she'll do a full AoE, which does do quite a bit of damage. When you have all the potion effects, depending on how far you went, she will be hitting around 100-ish or so. So that's going to be a decent amount of damage. However, you do use her almost more often for the board clear or for the new board, so that you can use the attack gains off of the Dementicores or the Chaos Hound skulls into better impact, so you can actually hit with them and not end up missing as often. Other than that, some other things that you can do to go through this faction if you need cheaper options. Mage with triple skeleton or Mage with Empower that assists your team with double skeleton is one of the cheaper teams that you can end up building. Mage is a weapon that you get around 23 brown-red hero mastery. You'd want to do this with Titan, level to at least 40 so that you gain barrier every single brown. You would also have Brown Storm if you end up doing that. It ends up working out pretty well. And once you get that fully traded, you also have a half mana start. As far as the Lamashtu here, you don't necessarily have to use this, but there's a lot of yellow, as I mentioned, in this faction. The first and final battle is almost pure yellow, so you can counter that out by converting out all yellow to purple. This does a little bit of damage, though that damage isn't really relevant. It's mostly because of the Empower into the purple convert. They end up using this thing, and then with that, you can end up doing your skeletons. So with your skeletons, these create a small amount of skull, pretty much a similar amount of skulls to that of the Hound from this faction. However, this does have automatic extra turn, so as long as you're not frozen, you're not going to lose your turn for doing these skulls. And in combination with Mage, you're going to be able to get a lot of attack, because Mage, of course, destroys all the armor of a target. And not only that, which is already pretty effective, you also then gain a really high attack gain off it. So if they have something like 200 attack, you just gained yourself, if they have something like 200 armor, you just gained yourself 200 attack. So you get quite a bit of stats that way, and you could use that into some skeletons doing their extra turn thing to poke several times and basically kill out that way. And you can use Barrier Brown on Hero to make sure that when the enemy ends up taking skulls, that they do 0 damage to you. Other than that, there's also a slightly more expensive team that still doesn't use any mythics, Divine Ishbaala Quentin combo. You could also run this with Rope Dart if you really want to, but it upscales a little bit better with Mage if you're planning to bring this all the way to something like 400, 500. And basically what this will do is same kind of premise. We're using Mage to, of course, gain all the attack that we can, but we're using Divine Ishbaala Quentin combo in order to do our skulls rather than double skeleton, which are both legends. The Moon Rabbits here, which is an epic, which you, once you get Empower on, does the convert from blue to yellow, and this, of course, feeds into Divine Ishbaala and Quentin. This team is most often used with Rope Dart, as I mentioned. However, if you don't have Rope Dart, you can use Mage, and if you're doing the higher level battles, pretty much anything above 300 or so, Mage would end up working better than a Rope Dart, possibly even sooner than that. So for when you're doing delves at higher stats, you generally would want to switch into a Mage-like option and just kill them out that way. And similar to the other Titan, you basically just take Browns to make sure that the enemy doesn't do any damage to you, scale up Mage so you can get a lot of damage per your skulls, and then just go with Divine Ishbaala Quentin loop and kill them out with that method. Other than that, Vespera, different variants of Vespera are available, given that it's a yellow and purple related faction. This is a purple variant. You could, of course, go with various yellow variants, but since that other team was already kind of a yellow variant, the one that we ended up doing with the Essence of Evil and everything, or the Nimbus Bow, that team up there, or not that one, I keep forgetting his name, the Finesse team can end up being used in the exact same way with Vespera, since of course it is a pure yellow troop, which ends up working of course really well with Vespera, as she likes to be synergized with pure colored troops of her color. But you could do the exact same kind of premise with Cunning, and just use something like Mirror or similar purple related weapons in order to synergize with it, and basically just kind of same kind of premise as Finesse. I personally don't find this to work as well. However, for the lower level range, it still would be perfectly fine to run something similar to that if you want to go down the Vespera route. And other than that, the meta is available. I still feel like this is the absolute meta team. I didn't personally use this because I wanted to try something different, so I ended up staying with the Finesse for the entire 500. However, this is still really relevant. Mountain Crusher into High King, Iron Guts, Dewgoff, and Possess King. Any faction that this is available for, I still feel like is the best option for anything that's around 350 to 400 plus. For the really late section of factions, you could technically start using it as early as like 100 or 200 if you really wanted to. But the really end ones is where it shines, because most things on this team does not care what the enemy stats are. They could be all 1000 and it still wins at about the exact same pace compared to other teams that generally will slow down as the enemy gets higher stats. The main reason for that is, of course, Iron Gut, High King Iron Gut has a Devour, and in something like Factions where you can gain a lot of additional bonuses, he can sometimes start with a 100% chance to Devour, and that is obviously pretty devastating, having a guaranteed Devour on his first cast and an auto extra turn. And other than that, Dewgoff has an instant kill that can hit through things that have immune to Devour, so anything that High King Iron Gut can't kill, the Dewgoff can. And the Possess King is basically just used for additional mana accumulation off his final trait, combined with the fact that you have Mountain Crusher. Possess King can also be used to allow High King Iron Gut to devour things that he can't normally devour. However, Dewgoff in this team is normally used for that role, and Mountain Crusher just constantly keeps gaining barrier by gaining browns onto the board, and it will just keep cascading more and more browns, which will give it more and more barriers, so essentially you never die from this team. And that's basically the whole premise. And even if you do end up dying, High King Iron Guts in your first slot, so as soon as it gets to Devour, it has enough stats that it's not really going to be dying in any given situation. And that's pretty much everything to really mention for this faction. I do advise, if you are going to go and consider potioning it, that you... or to end up potioning this faction, because if you are planning on maxing out this faction, I believe it is near impossible to do so with no potion effects. It is an extremely random kind of mechanic, and while there are quite a few factions that can be at least attempted without potions, this is one of them that is 100% mandatory that you would end up needing it. Definitely one of the harder few, so if you are going to do it, it is highly considered if you're are at the point where you're doing pure factions to any capacity. And if you haven't done it this one, we will be able to do it again in a few more weeks, so once that ends up rolling back around, it is worth considering, as you would be able to get one of the hardest factions pretty much out of the way, so you don't need to deal with it if you're at the point where you're starting to get them up. One other thing that I didn't even mention, and one of the reasons why it might be enticing to actually go and max these out if you are towards endgame or the later part or late game, is +1 permanent magic has been added as of this faction. It is now possible to reach 44,000 total renown. It's technically possible to reach 45,000 at this current moment in time. Not too big a deal if you can't get it right now. Of course, you could just wait till a couple more factions to just get it up naturally if you don't have a bunch of maxed factions. However, +1 magic, as many of you know, is a very, very useful stat. It is the most useful stat in the game, and having that higher for things like Guild Wars and even just general anything is a pretty nice bonus to have, and it has finally been added as of this faction, so a little bit more enticing now than ever to end up getting a faction up a little bit. Of course, you get some other stats, but the +1 magic, one of the more noteworthy ones that ends up coming from it. But anyways, guys, that's everything for this video. If you still have any other questions about the faction, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. I end up running it with the... level 200 Horde, as well as 8 of the potions. It can be done with quite a bit less than that, but depending on how lucky or unlucky you end up getting, you can end up doing it with less or more. It's definitely going to need some amount of potion effects, though, to end up getting through. But anyways, guys, I'll catch you guys later. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Goodbye, everyone!